Do you ever feel sometimes when you're expecting to have a bad day, but then it turns out to be a really good day? So you decide to just feel bad to make, to validate the bad day for yourself. Have you? Hello everyone, welcome to Narain's Life with MS. This is Narain and it's time for What MS Taught Me. And I think really the name of the series should be What MS Makes Me Forget, because every time I think, oh yeah, that is maybe a good lesson, I tend to forget it. Right? So, but I do have something to talk about, and it is, it definitely seems a little bit a like I am venting, and I probably am, right? Truth be told, I most likely am venting over here. But one thing that MS taught me was to say quiet, just stay quiet. And the reason I do that is because you, like, especially when you have something like MS and you just have to be a little more selfish. You have to look at what's happening. Sometimes you do need to ask for help. Sometimes you you know just have to realize that you need help. um in doing that, you definitely give off sometimes, and usually I feel it this way, the impression that you might always need help. And it definitely becomes a little bit of an issue, because I don't even remember who did this, but I remember someone. I was just discussing something. I think I was talking about another person who had another disability. And I was talking to this one person, and that one person had that amazing idea to literally compare the two of us, right? And well, yeah, I don't think you should compare two people with disabilities, right? I mean, first of all, everyone is unique. Everyone has their own idea, their own threshold as to what they can and cannot, are not able to do. And on top of that, it's one thing to be comparing two people who may be um, very similar in a lot of things, but to compare two people that have completely different disabilities, right? Be it however they got their disabilities, right? I mean, everyone has their own story, everyone has their own journey, but to be comparing two people just because they have their own challenges is honestly a little I don't know, I'm trying to find a good word. I'd say a little, you know um what's the word that I'm getting to? It's a little uncalled for, right? I think that's the best word to use. It's a little uncalled for because you know first of all, you can't assume someone is in a certain position because they have a certain medical condition, right? And on top of that, the things change, realities change, and a lot of times what ends up happening is you know the only thing that we end up doing is sometimes comparing things that shouldn't really be compared, to be perfectly honest, right? Regardless of, who's probably facing more pain, who is experiencing a lot more degeneration, and especially when it is about, people with disabilities, right? I mean, first of all, I think everyone should be thankful if they don't have one. Right? I think that's always, for the better, right? You should always try to think, you know, where would, let's say, if you're talking to a person with a disability, don't, underestimate what they would have achieved had they had, the same abilities you probably have, being someone without a disability, right? Because it's, something that, you know sure, I mean, I can agree to a lot of things, but at one point in time, something that, was more or less, or at least I never probably had a chance of saying no to, right? Especially this disease, I think it's uncalled for to really just say, oh yeah, see, your disease is a lot more, is a lot better in terms of situation in comparison to this, right? I mean, how are you so sure of that in the first place, right? um, and and so, and the reason I called this a venting was because this has happened to me, I want to say, at least 4 times, where, someone was talking to me and they said, it's a good, and someone actually told me, and I pretty much am quoting them word for word, um, that, that it's unfortunate that I have this medical condition, but at least it's, at least it's not like that person who has this medical condition. Like, okay, I get it, you can compare exam results, you can compare how much someone's IQ is, maybe, or how much someone's EQ is, but please don't compare our disabilities to say, oh yeah, this one's better than this one, right? Neither of them are, you know worth comparing, right? Because at the end of the day, your, whatever reputation you had in my mind has just dropped quite a bit. And on top of that, it's just going to make me feel bad that maybe I'm not trying hard enough, right? And so that is, and a lot of times I feel like I am trying as much as I want to, right? um, so at the end of the day, I do end up feeling a little bit of a sting every time this happens. And considering it's happened 3 times with me, I'm pretty sure it's not the end of someone telling me, oh yeah, oh, you have this thing. Well, I know someone who has this, and honestly, you're so much better off than them, right? I mean, at the end of the day, part of where I am is also because I try every day to be the person that I am, right? So yeah, I'd say that is something that, if you do have an opinion that is comparing to people who obviously got the short end of the stick in one way or another, maybe, if you don't have that short end of the stick yourself, maybe don't be the one to pass judgment onto others. And this is where I want to actually come back to, how MS taught me to be silent, and quiet. Because, considering that, you know, there are days where you actually can experience these exact, these exact words, that you can experience these exact sentiments, you know, make me realize that, chances are it's just not worth talking to people, right? Because at the end of the day, the one thing I try to do, and uh, maybe that's not the right thing, or maybe that's not the right thing to do, but I try to be a people pleaser. And the best way I know how to please people is to maybe not say what I'm thinking right at that point, because chances are, if you're making a comment like that to me, chances are whatever I'm thinking is probably not in your best interest. So at the end of the day, I try to keep my mouth shut. And it definitely goes much further. I'd say it definitely goes a lot longer for me, because at the end of the day, I am generally not, I end up keeping the other person's, um, keeping the other person happy to some extent, and at the same time, I, you know, pretty much try not to let, crass comments like that, um, affect me. And sure, it makes me think once in a while, but at the same time, I know that, the good thing is, the benefit is, and this is more a benefit for the other person, that they do not have to experience what I have to, or what, whoever else has to, right? So they have the ability to be able to stand on their 2 feet without the fear of getting too tired, getting too sick, getting too this or that, or, being afraid of doing one thing or another, because they're, in a much healthier position. So hopefully, hopefully I did not trigger anyone. I know a lot of people do experience this kind of judgment upon them just because something or the other has happened. And while I did, approach this more from, um, position of being a person with a disability being compared to another person with a disability, I know that, this happens with people for every single thing. And so I think this lesson really should be for all of us, that, if you're receiving some form of negativity, right, or some form of a passing comment that, is uncalled for, completely uncalled for, just stay silent. Right, just stay silent, let it go, because at the end of the day, chances are the person who made the comment does not know what they're talking about. And hopefully this did not sound like a vent, even though I'm pretty sure I was venting. um, But of course, with all of that said, I do want to announce that it is Wednesday, which means that the weekend is right around the corner. So, of course, you can get your hopes up for that. But of course, with all of that said, this is Narain's MS. I am Narain, and here's me wishing you a good night, sweet dreams, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Bye.